afternoon. Good 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 afternoon. Noon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. And many more. Welcome to Darren Dialogues. I'm your host today, Shantae Charles, and I am somewhere in the algorithm. I'm not saying anything gossipy. I'm not saying anything scandalous. I'm not saying anything trashing somebody's name. So I get it. I'm not going to get thousands and thousands and thousands of views, but I'm here because I feel like what I have to say is important. It is still Black History Month, and we are moving right along. We have finished season 17, and these are some bonus episodes, being that we're still in Black History Month. Today, we're reading from our two books, and I want to read you from the Illustrated Black History book, Honoring the Iconic and the Unseen. We're looking today at a man by the name of J. Max Bond Jr. And here is the drawing of J. Max Bond Jr. Let's get into it. He lived from 1935 to 2009, and he writes or says, architecture inevitably involves all the larger issues of society. Buildings tell stories about who and what matters, how buildings are conceived, where they're located, and what spaces and amenities they feature. All these things reveal the interests and priorities of the people who design, build, and use those spaces. J. Max Bond Jr. was inspired to consider the possibilities of making buildings while growing up in Tuskegee, Alabama. Both his parents were educators. His father held a deanship at Tuskegee Institute, an appointment that would eventually take the Bond family to countries such as Liberia, Afghanistan, and Tunisia. But it was the large-scale buildings at the Tuskegee Institute that first captured his imagination. Bond graduated from Booker T. Washington High School in Atlanta at the age of 13 and continued on to Harvard University at the age of 16. He graduated in 1955 but stayed on at Harvard, earning a master's degree in architecture from the Graduate School of Design in 1958, but not before a professor at the school cautioned Bond to pursue another, more suitable career, lest he struggle to find work as a Black architect. Fortunately, Bond ignored this advice and went on to become one of the most celebrated figures in his profession. His intention was to make buildings their mission, their spaces and their representations more inclusive of the communities in which they existed. In 1970, Bond and Donald Ryder co-founded Bond, Ryder and Associates, a Black-led architectural firm. Their work centered on incorporating the Black experience at every level of their project. For the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent and Social Change in Atlanta, Bond chose brick as the facade material in an effort to hire brick masons. To keep King's memorial aligned with the family's wishes that it be fashioned of the materials of everyday life, Bond employed locally sourced wood and limited marble to the crypt. Similarly, at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in Harlem, The interior paneling features sapele in African wood. In 1990, Bond Ryder merged with Davis, Brody and Associates to become Davis, Brody, Bond. During Bond's tenure and with his leadership, the firm was selected to develop the National September 11 Memorial and Museum in Lower Manhattan and co-designed as part of the team Freelon Ajayi Bond Smith Group, the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture as well. For that latter project, Bond collaborated with David Ajayi and Phil Freelon on the early concepts that would allow the team to win the assignment back in 2008. Bond died in 2009 before the museum was fully realized, but his imprint on the space, the only museum in the United States fully dedicated to depicting the comprehensive journey of Black people in the U.S., is unmistakable. And unfortunately, right now, some of that history is not going to be accurately depicted because they have gone through and removed memorials. They returned some of the artifacts to some of the families that donated, and they have adjusted some of the signage so that it does not read as accurate history in the museum dedicated to Black history. But they're not only doing that to that museum, they're also doing it to any museum and any Smithsonian museum in particular. So, just something to take note of, a very sad chapter, unfortunately, in America's history, that we have people in real time, we have government in real time trying to erase history. Now, let's get into our book readings for today. In case you didn't know, this is Daring Dialogues. I'm your host, Shantae Charles, and this is Thinking Thursday, Theology Thursday, where we talk all things thought, thought processes, philosophies, religion, faith, belief, etc. So we're back in the book, Reparations, A Christian Call for Repentance and Repair by Duke Kwon and Gregory Thompson, two gentlemen who felt compelled to begin to write about this topic back in 2020. Today's topic is from the chapter, Seeing the Reality of Pseudo Supremacy. I won't call it white supremacy, it's pseudo supremacy. But this is the subtopic, White Supremacy as Pervasive and as Enduring. So those are the two sections we're going to look at today in this book. In the years following the War for Independence, the men who were once colonists and then insurrectionists took a new mantle, founding father. In so doing, they began the momentous task of transforming America from a possibility into a polity, from a set of ideas into a system of institutions. That was the point all along, of course, not simply to just write pamphlets about liberty and equality, but to build a social order conducive to their flowering. In a true marvel of political entrepreneurship, they created the new institutions of the nation, each giving particular expression to the meaning of American ideals. As with the revolution, it is tempting to tell the story of this institutional unfolding in a way that fails to disclose the role of pseudo supremacy. Sadly, this omission is an American pastime. The truth, however, is that this supremacy, rather than being an unfortunate and aberrant weed in the garden of democracy, was in fact the native species that grew into and flowered out of every institution that the American founders created in every region of the nation. In other words, it was pervasive. It is impossible to tell the story of the scope of it in a few pages. There are entire shelves of literature devoted to exploring the presence of pseudo supremacy in a host of discrete regional and institutional domains. The best we can do is gesture toward the comprehensiveness of it all, and to persuade you as the reader that while there is more that could be said about the scope, there is also certainly not less. The years following the revolution, the American Revolution, seemed to offer the possibility of a change in African American fortunes, as we discussed last time. The endurance of pre-revolutionary abolitionist sentiment, the desire to build strong relationships with skeptical European allies, And the early stages of new religious awakening led to a surprising, if small, trend toward manumission, setting Black people free, and open conversations about the role of free Africans in the new republic. True equality was never on the table, but it was at least plausible to imagine a short term future in which America would resolve its inherent tension between liberty and bondage. It was not to be. The liberation of African Americans, while formally consistent with the founders' boundary revolutionary ideals, created problems for their actual institutions. Most pressing was the concern about the role of the growing number of free Black people in a system of representative government. Given white beliefs about the limited personal and moral capacity of Black Americans, and given white fears of the possibility of Black political influence, any notion of Black citizenship at this point was out of the question. But if they were not slaves, and if they were not citizens, then what were they? How were they to be governed? And perhaps most important of all, how were they to relate to white people? Rather than resolving these difficult questions by enfolding Black Americans into the American Republic, the founding fathers established two approaches to African American life, approaches that transformed the nature of the American institutions. The first of these was segregation. Already firmly established in American plantation life, segregation just extended through increased restrictions on social relations between Black and white Americans, and through the creation of separate social and religious institutions. So when people say, why do we have a Black this and a Black that? Why do we have a white this and a white that? Understand that it was institutionalized. These were the paths that were initially created, and they weren't created by Black people. By the turn of the century, a more dramatic solution had begun to take root: colonization. If Black Americans deserve freedom but could not live as free people in America, perhaps they should be sent back to Africa. This was strongly opposed by both Northern Blacks who believed that they should be citizens, and opposed by Southern whites who believed that they should be slaves. Even so, it was embraced by a number of America's political leaders as the only viable solution to America's internal contradictions. By 1817, the American Colonization Society was formed, and experiments in returning Blacks to Africa had begun, and some actually did go back. This anxiety about Black political and social power and the emergence of both segregation and colonization in response demonstrate in the clearest possible terms the power of pseudo supremacy in the early American imagination. In its institutional practice, America was a country for whites. And while being Black in America no longer guaranteed enslavement, it also did not yet mean freedom. This early institutional structure was contested, of course. Abolitionist communities, both Black and white, struggled to turn public sentiment against enslavement in particular and pseudo supremacy in general. But these movements, though powerful, were no match for the political and economic power of the American South. The early American institutionalization of white supremacy, with its perpetuation of slavery, its insistence on segregation, and its pressure toward colonization, remained intact for nearly a century. And now they're trying to bring it back. In the intervening years, the central question of American political life was what would happen to these institutions as the nation expanded in new territories. Would the agricultural slave economies of the American South dominate those territories too, and thus the nation? Or would more urban and abolitionist energies of the North expand their power? It was a question that would only be answered by war. As with the Revolution, the years following the Civil War opened a new window for Black American freedom. The seeds of this freedom were sown in the enlistment of Black soldiers, and in time, emancipation of the Black enslaved. As the war began to end, these seeds of freedom flowered in rapid succession. Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866, establishing citizenship for everyone born in the United States without respect to race, color, or previous condition of servitude, and requiring the free exercise of the privileges of this citizenship. Now, this is super important in this hour because people are trying to get rid of birthright citizenship. Listen to those conditions again. Citizenship for everyone born in the United States without respect to race, color, or, very key, previous condition of servitude, requiring the free exercise of the privileges of this citizenship. Because what happens when you take away citizenship for the descendants of people who have been previously enslaved? You leave them in limbo. You leave them vulnerable to human rights abuses. Several months later, the 14th Amendment, which permanently established these rights in the Constitution, and for the first time gave Congress the power to enforce this law, was passed and sent to the states for ratification. And in 1870, the 15th Amendment, prohibiting the denial of the right to vote to any male citizen, including Black Americans, was ratified as well. In an almost miraculous turn, Black Americans' long insistence on their own equality had transformed from an unanswered personal plea to an established constitutional right. So again, when you see people trying to get rid of the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment, they're essentially saying we want to go back to pre-Civil War times. Yeah. In truth, however, it was a fragile transformation. In spite of the events in Washington and the ecstasies of the abolitionists, much of the nation remained deeply opposed to Black American equality. And still to this day, we've got about a third of the nation who is still deeply opposed to Black American equality. They're just more vocal about it now. And in 1877, when the federal government ended its commitment to Reconstruction and withdrew military forces from the South, this opposition consolidated power with astonishing speed. Almost overnight, communities across the United States, especially though not exclusively in the South, re-established a hierarchical racial order as the basis of social and political life. And they perfected and policed it with an unprecedented level of violence. This thus was born Jim Crow, a comprehensive institutional expression of American pseudo supremacy that they are trying to bring back. Over time, as this system solidified, virtually every aspect of American institutional life, voting, education, employment, lending, housing, healthcare, transportation, policing, and even religion took on the shape of pseudo supremacy. Every aspect of life. By the 20th century, in spite of the ideals of the revolution and the promises of emancipation, America's original commitment to pseudo supremacy had taken a dominant and pervasive institutional form that would endure for the next 80 years. And here is where we are, because they are trying to re-entrench it, re-enshrine it, not for 80 years. They're trying to go for probably a couple hundred years at this point with some of the stuff they're pulling. As W.E.B. Du Bois points out and puts it, the slave went free, stood a brief moment in the sun, then moved back again towards slavery. Pseudo supremacy as enduring. In 1955, a young activist named Rosa Parks staged a planned protest on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Parks, a veteran anti-racist who spent years documenting white violence against Black women in the South, was the perfect choice. She possessed not only an absolute commitment to dismantling pseudo supremacy, but also a strong personal character and an impeccable public reputation. She and local NAACP leaders believed that she was the right person to help force the issue of segregation into federal court and to force the Southern states to comply with federal law. Thus began the classical era of the civil rights movement, the period in the middle of the 20th century in which the legitimacy of pseudo supremacy was systematically challenged across the entire landscape of American institutions. In 1954, the landmark case Brown versus Board of Education successfully challenged the legitimacy of pseudo supremacy in schools. In 1955, the Montgomery Improvement Association, led by Dr. King, challenged its legitimacy in public transportation. In 1957, the Little Rock challenged the legitimacy of states to obstruct federal integration law. In 1958, the NAACP Youth Council carried out a sit-in protest to challenge the legitimacy of segregated lunch counters in Kansas and Oklahoma. In 1960, student groups carried out sit-in protests in businesses across the United States. In 1961, the Freedom Riders challenged the legitimacy of segregation in interstate travel. In 1962, James Meredith challenged the legitimacy of segregated public universities. In 1963, some 250,000 people gathered in Washington, D.C. to protest racial inequality at the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. In 1964, college students from across the country joined the Freedom Summer Movement in Mississippi to challenge its legitimacy at the polls. That same year, protests in Memphis challenged the legitimacy of segregated churches, because that had to be challenged by law. In 1965, protesters challenged white supremacy in police departments in Selma, Alabama, and Los Angeles. In 1966, King moved to Chicago to protest the role of pseudo supremacy in housing inequality, and the Black Panther Party emerged in Los Angeles to address it. In 1967, in Loving versus Virginia, the Supreme Court rejected state bans on interracial marriage. And in 1968, just a few days before his unaliving, his assassination, King joined the sanitation workers in Memphis to protest unequal wages and employment practices. Two things can be seen here. One, this is a journey to liberation. Every year, practically, they were doing something towards liberation. And it wasn't just for Black people. Although Black people were the ones pressing into the liberation, this was going to help everybody who was marginalized, not just Black people. Second, we can note that when they got to the part about money, challenging money, challenging wages, challenging employment practices, somebody said, enough is enough and the buck stops here. And we got to stop this man, because if he keeps going, it's going to upend our financial systems. This period was by any measure the most astonishing assault on institutionalized pseudo supremacy since the era of Reconstruction, one of the most dramatic moments of social transformation since the revolution. So when you hear people trying to blow off the significance of the civil rights movement, when you hear people trying to blow off or try to discredit or discount what your elders and my elders your grandparents, some of your great grandparents did to move the needle of liberation forward, they don't know what they're talking about. They haven't read enough. Ignore them and keep moving forward to liberation. Even so, the triumphs of this movement and the power they exert over our collective imagination can serve to obscure two important realities. The first is the fact that it had to happen at all. People had to be made to treat people equally. I want you to think about that. Remember this time period in which Rosa Parks was arrested, Black students were dragged from white establishments, Black children were blocked from going to white schools by screaming adults, buses were bombed in Alabama, churches were burned and bombed, and Dr. King was shot in the neck. This was nearly 200 years after the Revolutionary War and 100 years after emancipation. Centuries after the American founders chose to institutionalize pseudo-supremacy in the new republic, Americans were still at war over that choice. And here we are in 2026, and Americans are still at war over that choice. This points to one of the most important features of pseudo-supremacy, its endurance. Far from being a discrete phenomenon locked away in one or two unfortunate and easily dismissed periods of American history, it is rather a constant. Contrary to popular perception, the civil rights movement did not simply emerge out of the context of mid-century Southern American racism. It was rather a contemporary expression of one of the most abiding struggles in American culture, the struggle against the enduring dominance of pseudo-supremacy. The second important reality is that pseudo-supremacy did not come to an end after that era of the civil rights movement. One of the most cherished and consoling myths of American culture is that the triumph of the civil rights movement over the powers of mid-century segregation was a triumph over pseudo-supremacy itself. The truth is far more complicated. True, the work of the civil rights movement secured important victories with respect to the power of pseudo-supremacy in American institutions, both public and private, but we see how quickly and how rapidly those conditions are being undone in real time. The fruit of those victories was real, but yet so are their limitations. The civil rights movement dealt a powerful blow to pseudo-supremacy, but the blow was not fatal. The endurance is evident in the years following the civil rights movement. In the weeks after King's unaliving in April 1968, cities across America were engulfed in flames of protest, and not simply because King had been killed, but because the movement he symbolized, which had come so far, still had so far to go. Legally speaking, Jim Crow had ended, but its two defining characteristics, separation and inequality, remain defining features of American life. In response to this, the early 1970s saw the birth of several Black coalitions devoted to filling the leadership gap created by the death of King and to closing the social gap created by the endurance of pseudo-supremacy. Over the following decade, they focused their work on continuing to integrate schools, consolidate Black political power, secure rights for Black workers, create a holiday in celebration of King's legacy. In the 80s, these leaders continued to make important gains in the broader application of non-discrimination laws in voting, housing, and employment. These efforts continued throughout the 1990s, while presciently adding a more deliberate focus on racially motivated police misconduct. But that was only one part of the issue. This led to a series of attempts to reopen unsolved murders from the civil rights era that resulted in the convictions of Byron D. LeBeckwith, who assassinated Medgar Evers in 1994, and Edgar Ray Killen, the ringleader of the Mississippi civil rights murders of 1964 of Cheney, Schwerner. In 2005, as well as the indictment of James Bernard Fowler, the murderer of Jimmy Lee Jackson in 1965, and in 2007. In spite of these real victories, however, public attention to violence against Black communities has only grown in recent years, leading to the founding of Black Lives Matter in 2013 and the broader coalition Movement for Black Lives in 2014. And all along, even as violence and policing have taken the center stage in public eye, resistance has continued to take place across a range of issues, including voting, hiring, housing, capital investment, and philanthropy. Though by no means comprehensive, this brief account of recent attempts to oppose pseudo-supremacy illustrates the endurance of it in American culture. It reminds us that this is not merely a historical accident, an occasional emergence in an otherwise egalitarian history. Rather, pseudo-supremacy is original to America, pervasive across its institutions, enduring from the beginning of its history to the very present moment. Seeing ourselves. Douglass's invitation to his hearers that day, Frederick Douglass, in his 4th of July speech, much like the sanitation workers who followed him a century later, was an invitation to see. To see, perhaps for the first time, what America is as a nation and who we are as a people. It was an invitation to see ourselves, to see that both we and the culture we share have been profoundly disordered by the reality of racism. Seeing this requires us to see the reality of pseudo-supremacy. It means seeing that America has used modern racial categories as a fundamental way of understanding human beings and ordering relations between them. These racial categories have had an anthropological as well as social and political function. Douglass's invitation means seeing that the social function of being white entails this pseudo-supremacy, holding the dominant role in the social hierarchy and a disproportionate claim to its privileges. It means seeing that this supremacy is not accidental, but a result of specific choices we have made as a people. It means seeing that these choices were original to the founding of America, pervasive across all institutions, and enduring throughout American history. For it is only in seeing the reality that we can begin to come to terms with the profound limitations of other ways of seeing racism as just personal prejudice, relational estrangement, or institutional injustice, important as these are, and begin to see it in cultural terms. It is only in seeing the reality of pseudo-supremacy that we can begin to come to terms with the incalculable darkness of its effects. And that was the end of chapter 2. Chapter 3 in this book is entitled Seeing the Effects of Pseudo-Supremacy. And we're seeing the effects in real time. You know, we're living through some of the effects in real time. So when we come back to this book in season 18, we'll be on chapter 3, but I want to give you the cover of the book so you can take a look at it. All right. For those of you who like to screenshot. And it is a little bit past my time here, so I want to make sure that I leave time for conversation. Pastor Ben, are you still with us? You still with us? Also, next time when we return, we will be back in this book here, and we'll be reading about the early Quaker anti-slavery movement. Study up so you'll be ready to read with us. All right, I'm going to add you. I do want to share one story about what is happening with birthright citizenship and why is it important? Why are they trying to move this thing? I want you all to take a listen to this story. This was a reported story done fairly recently, a couple of days ago. This is a 59-year-old woman. Her name is Ramona Rakestraw. Her Social Security was stopped after her quote unquote immigration status was under review. I want you to take a listen to her story, and I want you to think about why they are trying to remove birthright citizenship. Take a listen.
Have you ever lived out of the country? No. Have you been out of the country for 30 days or longer? No. I went further. Have you been out of Dallas County? No. Ever in life? Never. I am shocked. Kidney disease took Ramona Rakestraw to dialysis at age 28. Then a transplant. 30 years later, back on dialysis and a cancer diagnosis in 24. All that time, she's received SSI, Supplemental Security Income from Social Security. Shocked when it stopped last October. And so when you called them, they told you what? They told me my immigrant status was being questioned. And so I said, I'm not an immigrant. But there are circumstances that can trigger flags about citizenship status. So I ask, have you ever lived out of the country? No. Have you been out of the country for 30 days or longer? No. I went further. Have you been out of Dallas County? No. Ever in life? Never. Rakestraw says she took her ID and her birth certificate, born in Parkland Hospital, 1966, to her Social Security office. Then receiving this letter from the Social Security Administration saying we cannot give you your benefits. We cannot pay you benefits because you are not lawfully present in the U.S. That's my income, my whole income. Now, you do have the right to appeal. Yes, and I have written out the forms and everything, and I am appealing. If you receive notice of benefit denial or suspension, you have 60 days to request an appeal. You must have an in-person meeting and update your status to prove citizenship. Your case will be reviewed by a different person than the one who made the denial decision. And you hope that's approved? Yes. What happens if not? I don't know. Let's just take it a day at a time. Have you ever lived out of the country? No. Have you been out?
That should anger every single American. Because what do you mean? This woman is collecting her Social Security, going about her business, taking care of herself medically. She has cancer, which means if she doesn't have her finances, she can't get her treatments or the medication that might be required. What do you mean? Her immigration status. This is the stuff that people are doing to Black Americans in real time and other people. But this is the stuff that people are doing because they know that our government right now is backing pseudo supremacy tactics. And this is one of them. Our government is trying to get people's birthright citizenship status revoked. So what are they making her do? Quote unquote, prove her citizenship. Now I want you to back up a little bit more, and I want you to think about some of our elders who don't have their birth certificates. Some of our older elders who didn't have birth certificates. This has always been a problem in the United States of America. Let me give you the data on that. Give me 1 second. How many older Americans do not have access to their birth certificates? Listen to this. An estimated 2.3 million elderly Americans lack easy access to necessary citizenship documents such as a birth certificate or a passport. 2.3 million. A significant number of older Americans, particularly African Americans born in the South between 1930 and 1950, were born at home and were never formally issued a birth certificate. That's not on them. Lack of these documents can hinder their access to social safety net programs such as Medicaid and Social Security. Who wants to get all the way toward the end of your life and have your funds snatched away because somebody is playing games in the government saying that you are potentially an immigrant and now you have to go and prove your citizenship with documents that you might not have as an elderly person? That is a major problem. It should infuriate every American. It should, but it doesn't. All right. I'm going to bring you on, Pastor Ben. All right, I have sent you the link. But again, these are the things that we've been trying to warn people about. That this nation is essentially trying to draw us back into pseudo supremacy, back to the level of pre-civil war, not pre-civil rights, pre-civil war. That's where they're trying to drag us back to. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How
How
are
are
you?
you?
I'm good. We've got about 20 minutes.
Okay.
Okay.
I saw
I
that
saw that
interview,
interview
Mm-hmm.
and it was like,
and it was like,
you need
you
your
need
birth
your birth
certificate to
certificate to
prove your
prove your
citizenship.
citizenship.
She
She
had her
had a
birth
birth
certificate
certificate
and
and
was
was
still
still
denied.
denied.
Mm-hmm.
That's
That's
some
some
Jim
Jim
Crow
Crow
101.
101.
Yep.
You got
You
all the
got all
proof
the
you
proof you
need, but
need, but
oh, there's still
there's
a
still a
problem.
problem.
You're
You're
black.
black.
Right.
That's the
That's
bottom
the
line.
bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
That's the
That's
bottom
the
line.
bottom line.
You got your
You
birth
got your birth
certificate.
certificate.
And here's
And
another
here's
thing.
another thing.
They're
They're
now
now
they're
they're
trying to
trying to
pass a
pass a
bill
bill
where you have
where
to
you
have
have
a
to
birth
have a birth
certificate
certificate
and or
and or
a
a
passport
passport
in
Mm-hmm.
order
in
to
order to
vote.
vote.
The
The
majority of
majority of
American
American
citizens don't
citizens
have a
don't have a
passport
passport
because they don't
because they don't
travel.
travel.
Right. Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I have
I have
one.
one.
I haven't
I
traveled
haven't
outside the
traveled
country,
outside the
but I
country,
have
but I
one.
have one.
I got
I
mine
got
years
mine
ago.
years ago.
So,
So,
it's like
it's like
this is
this
some
is some
ridiculous.
ridiculous.
But not
It's
only
not.
It's
that,
not.
but not only that, forcing people to have a passport is also can also be considered a financial barrier because it
Mm-hmm.
does cost, you know, a couple bands, close to 200 to get a passport, and then if you have to get one for each of your family members,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
that's several $100s. And a lot of people don't have that kind of disposable income
Right.
Right.
because of our economy. Let's throw that in there. People are already working 2 to 3 jobs just to get by in our current economy, and then you're saying, "Oh, you got to have this disposable income to go get a passport."
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
This is this
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
this is pre-Civil War behavior. And as I said, these people have never given up. They have always wanted a lost cause rematch. That's what they're aiming for. They want to get people angry enough that they're ready to rumble because they have wanted to have a rematch.
Here's the
Here's the
thing.
thing.
They lost
They
the
lost
first
the
one.
first one.
They really shouldn't want a second one. Seriously, they really shouldn't. Because I keep telling them, y'all lost the first one because y'all was trying to hold on to slaves. But y'all lost because those slaves and other people wanted those slaves to be free. What do you really think is going to happen if you get your second Civil War and advanced as black people are now in military acts, dominate special forces? Do you honestly think, oh, not only that, we're fighting for survival, not out of hatred, for survival, with over 400 years of oppression that's been passed down to us? Do you really think that you will walk away from this breathing? We don't want it. We just want to be left alone. Have you ever seen what happened to people that bother people that want to be left alone? And when that person finally explodes, y'all should watch some of those videos because it ain't too pretty for the bully.
I mean, all I'm saying is they're aiming for the lost cause. They're aiming
Oh,
for the lost cause.
mm-hmm. Oh, but did I mention? God is being robbed in this? Not on y'all side.
Now your sound is breaking up because of course every time we start talking about this we start getting a disconnection of sound. Say what you were saying again.
I was saying that God is going to be on our side. In fact, we as a group of people may not even have to fight.
I was actually thinking about that last night before I went to bed. I was like thinking to myself, who truly has what I would like to call spiritual cachet? Who has the righteous backing to be able to cause things to stand down in this country? In other words, who has not, as a people group, done atrocious things to other people? And I just started going down the line.
Mm-hmm.
I just started going down the line. Now, I'm not talking about just Africans in general, right? Because obviously on the continent of Africa, there was wars, there was prisoners of war and all of those things between tribes and all that. So I'm not even talking about Africa in general. I'm talking about Black America
Mm-hmm.
as a group. Who have we harmed?
Nobody.
I need some documentation. As a group, who have Black Americans harmed?
Nobody. No one.
And I had
No
to think
one.
about that because I have some indigenous blood,
Mm-hmm.
and I had to say even the indigenous cannot claim that.
Right.
Even the
I'm right there
indigenous
with
cannot
you.
claim that because they were participating in the Confederate War against us. Some of them,
Mm-hmm.
some of them took us as enslaved persons, and in some cases did not want to give up their enslaved persons. So we can't even say indigenous
Mm-hmm.
people are without blame. Their hands aren't clean either. So I
Mm-hmm.
looked it up. I asked, and I said, who, as a group, have Black Americans harmed? The data spit out to me? As a group, black Americans have been historically and systemically harmed by
Mm-hmm.
pseudo supremacy, including government entities, the Ku Klux Klan, white mobs, slavery, Jim Crow, racial violence, ongoing systemic racism, economic exclusion, police brutality, environmental inequality continue to disproportionately affect black communities.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Yeah.
that's what the data and the articles, and they gave me several articles. They gave me the National Institute, Stanford Medicine, CNN, Everytown Support, Bureau of Justice Statistics, Thomas Jefferson University, DC.gov. It did not spit out any data of black Americans as a group harming other people. Now I want people to let that sink in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Really.
Really let that sink in. So when people choose to ignore what black people are telling them about any given moment, about what injustice means and what it looks like, and when people get upset with us and then they come in your space and say things like, you guys are delusional, like the person I just deleted, or when they accuse us of taking the moral high ground, the reality is we are probably some of the only people who can take the moral high ground. And
Mm-hmm.
some people don't like that. Oh well. So, and that's not saying every black person. That's not what we're saying. We're saying as a group, who have we
As a
gone
group.
around and harmed? As a group, who have we gone around and harmed? And I just asked, and they couldn't pull up any historical documentation to confirm that we as a group have gone around harming people. That ought to make you pause.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's the case, why wouldn't you want the free leader of the world to be a black woman? Bum, 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 bum. I'm sorry. Why wouldn't you want to have a leader who doesn't have blood on their hands? I'm curious to know at this point. Now this has got me thinking. Why would you, in fact, choose just the exact opposite? Why would you choose someone who lies, who steals, who cheats, who assaults women, who could possibly be connected to the PDF file and possibly some unalivings of people and children that disappeared? Why would you choose the absolute worst of the worst from your people group? Why would you do that?
Because he represents who they are.
I've met some really good white people in my life, so I don't even want to. I don't want to put that on them. But I'm just like, y'all couldn't even choose the best. I mean, if you were gonna put somebody there,
No.
Thank you, Leslie. She said they do that so they will do their evil bidding.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it's the sense of, well, you should do our evil bidding because you are just as evil, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't tell us about evil because you just as evil as we are. So you might as well get to the business of evil. I get it. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you. Because I'm like, I don't know. If we want to have longevity as a country, I would think that we would want to put somebody in there that's knowledgeable, that is not falling apart at the seams in their body, fairly healthy, not necessarily really young, but have have enough experience, have some wisdom, you know, not green, but not, leaf falling off the vine, who doesn't have blood on their hands. I'm just saying. They also have removed all legitimate authorities that stands in the way. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And again, this is what I've said in the past. I have said you cannot tell me the people who are currently in office actually love America. They actually hate America because only a person who
Mm-hmm.
hates you would would set you up for such a destruction and a failure of your civilization, of your systems, um, of your whole government apparatus. Only a person who hates this country would do what they are doing. They're getting rich, yes, but they're also tearing up all of the frameworks, all of the infrastructure to the point where it's going to take a century to get any of this fixed. You don't do that if you claim to be a patriot and you say you love America. And so I don't
Mm-hmm.
understand why the people who follow them that claim to love this country can't see that. You can't see that they're literally tearing up everything that you say you love about the country. Literally.
Here's the thing. Hatred blinds people.
Got to be.
And that's exactly what he did. He gave them something to hate.
Man.
And then he controlled them. Hate the immigrants. Hate the Dems.
Mm-hmm.
Hate black people.
Yeah, I mean, I saw some of the
Hate
clips of the
Haitians. They're eating your pets.
I saw some of the clips of the State of the Union. Like somebody said, this was not a State of the Union is supposed to be designed for you to sort of give a progress report of what you have done for the nation. You are being invited in by
Mm-hmm.
Congress to give a progress report. This was not that. As somebody said, this was a mini Klan rally
Mm-hmm.
and a celebration of people who are loyal to him and not to the country.
Mm-hmm.
People who dote on him and have no real stake in wanting to do what is best for the country. And my thing is, y'all sat up there and let him broadcast this mess to the country. That was my issue. Like, if I'd have been there, I probably would have been a representative Al Green. The first lie that came out his mouth, I'd have been like,
Mm-hmm.
liar!
Me too.
And I would have been escorted out probably within the first 5 minutes, But I'm just saying, somebody needed to say liar, get it, at least get it on record. Get it on record. Leslie says the only thing to do is to rise up from the ashes and make our system fair this time. Yeah. Al Green says what we know. Yeah. Yep. Now I did not watch any alternative programming. But I am later today. Later today I'm gonna be looking at the transcript because they usually do a transcript of everything that's said. But it's very sad that the people in the chamber would allow him to try to pit them against their colleagues I'm like, are y'all
Mm-hmm.
clearly, again, once again, this is yet proving you're not a patriot. Why would you be pitted against your colleagues if y'all are both working for the will and the health of the people? The very fact that y'all sat up there and
Well,
let
because
him
some
pit
of them
you
are and
all,
some of them are not.
let him pit you all against each other, that tells us that you're traitors to the Constitution. Because again, you're not there to work with your colleagues to get stuff done for the American people. You're there to get a pat on the back and a medal and a certificate from a villainous, treasonous leader. And I really can't call him a leader. I really hate using that word because he's not a leader. He's in the seat,
Mm-hmm.
but he's not leading anything. Um, but final thoughts, because we can keep going. Final thoughts.
I'm gonna say this, and then I'm done. I want to make a statement on something that was there that happened. Now you got people complaining because the Democrats didn't stand up when he asked about, stand up if you're for putting Americans before illegal immigrants. Some people might not like it, but I'm gonna say this: if you're a Christian, you would not have stood up. If you're a Christian and you understand what was taught, you would not stand up. You would not have.
Fresh healthy muffins?
Thank you, sir.
Enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. That's my new friend that I met from Canada.
Mm-hmm.
We're out here at the
Cool.
park. But anyway, so when you understand biblical principles, which that particular party says that they operate under biblical principles and godly morals, are actually going against all of that. And I said that what it looked like the Democrats are more godly because they understand that a human is a human. And they also understand, apparently they understand what Christ said when he said, treat immigrants as though they're one of you. But even beyond that, the Constitution and the laws of this country goes against what he asked. So that's my final thought.
All right. Well, this has been another episode of Daring Dialogues, and I've been your host today, Shantae Charles. Leslie says she loves our questions. She uses them in conversation to try to get people to think for themselves. Sometimes it strikes a chord. Thank you for letting us know that. We're always encouraged to know how these messages, how our lessons, how our read alouds are impacting the people who come and listen. Remember, as we are beginning to close out Black History Month, remember, light is the most daring opposition to any kind of evil that you are facing. So please go out and be what?
Be light.
Light. All right, I want to thank you all. Remember, for March, we're only going to be on Mondays. We'll be on Mondays at 10 a.m. because it's Women's History Month. So we'll be doing a segment on those Mondays in March. April, we'll be back for season 18. Tomorrow is our last episode for this season. And then you'll be able to catch all the replays. We're going to set up a playlist, Daring Dialogue Season 17. You'll be able to come and look at that. Okay. Jim Borghini, there is a Men's History Month. I want you to go find out what it is, though. But there is a Men's History Month. Mm-hmm. Rosie is Frozen says, warm greetings from the Arctic Circle, Finland. I hope I can make you smile with this message at least. Stay awesome. Thank you, Finland. Welcome to our broadcast. Again, we'll be back tomorrow, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Jim, make sure you check in tomorrow and tell us what you found out about Men's History Month. I'm challenging you, Jim. You put the question out there, and I'm putting it back to you. You go find out when is Men's History Month and come back and tell us. I didn't see any other comments, Jim. That's actually the first one I've seen, and I'm watching the comments, so I'm not sure. Not sure why. All right. Thank you all for your time and attention. Take care, everyone. Be well, and most importantly, be light.